As you can see, Fiona and I are here, sitting here with Bill Ramsay and Isobel Lindsay, and we're really pleased to have you back. You've been our guest before, and we always enjoy talking to you, and it's always something very thought-provoking. So one of the times before, it was about nuclear castles in Ukraine, and I know that got a lot of people talking. So Bill, you asked if you and Isobel could come and have this chat with us. Do you want to do a bit of a background intro for us?
You've got to remember that Isobel is probably Scotland's, in my view, this is personal view. She is Scotland's leading anti-nuclear campaigner.
It's just an age thing.
And no, I said leading. Still, you are the leading anti-nuclear campaigner, Isobel. And one of, I think, the peace movement's most effective thinkers in this area.
Yes.
We've got the Middle East, we've got Ukraine, we've got China, and everybody's banging the drums of war. I mean, you even had Janet Daly in the Daily Telegraph talking about nuclear escalation. They're banging drums about war or near war, and they're getting into a place where they can comfortably talk about like pre-war situations, which even in 1914, as far as I'm aware, that was not a term that they used. But you've got the situation in the Middle East, which is carnage, but there's a nuclear dimension to that. Then you've got Ukraine, where both sides seem to be literally and metaphorically digging in a sort of war of attrition. And there's a potential nuclear dimension to that. And then you've got China, where the United States is seeing, and its allies, is seeing China as a potential competitor, not only in terms of commerce, but in terms of in military areas. So we've got that, and each of them have got a nuclear agenda. Now, it's not that one would expect any of the people involved to deliberately press the nuclear button. I don't expect Putin to do it. I don't expect Biden or Xi Jinping to do it. And I don't expect Netanyahu to do it. Though I think to the majority of the public, it would put a shiver up their spine to realise that Benjamin Netanyahu is sitting with a nuclear arsenal and is trying to up the ante in relation to Iran. You know, there are people who think they can move into a hot war with a nuclear dimension and pretend the nuclear dimension doesn't exist. I listened in horror to a France 24 debate, but there was someone on who actually said the following: because Israel and Pakistan have got nuclear weapons, and because Israel and Pakistan have worked out some ground rules relating to conflict to keep the nuclear dimension out of it, and I mentioned some of that in relation to nuclear power stations and McCassell's Zaporizhzhia paper, because of that, she said, we can dismiss it. If the Indians and the Pakistanis can stand, at the Wagah border ceremony and puff their chests out at each other every day, and they've got nuclear weapons, then the rest of the world can do it as well. But the point about nuclear weapons is, it's someone who will make a mistake. Somewhere in the military command food chain will do something and will be on the brink of nuclear war, as we can see from examples from the Cuban Missile Crisis. And since then, it's the potential for mistake. And there's far too many supposed leaders banging the drums of almost war in a context where we have nuclear weapons and dismissing the possibility of a mistake.
Remember that film, The Fog of War? That was the phrase that came to mind, actually, as you were speaking. Even, I mean, of the people you mentioned, Putin's maybe the one that's the least stable of them. But, if even him wouldn't actually be wanting to press a nuclear button. But in fog, you don't know what other people are doing. And you see shadows come up and they seem to be one thing, but, they're not. So mistakes can get made.
What's your take on it, Isobel? I think we're in an enormously high-risk situation today. I think there's a failure to get the knowledge of the extent to which there have been such substantial technical change taking place through to the public, through, for that matter, to the political class or the commentariat, because the technology is proceeding so fast. There was quite an interesting quote from about 3 years ago from Putin addressing their National Assembly. And he was saying, oh, change is taking place so fast. It's extreme. If you don't act, if you don't keep up, then you're destroyed. Now, this kind of state of mind, but there's an element in it of his awareness of the growth, for example, of the hypersonic weapons. And that's taking place. And of course, we've got the growth of AI, the extent to which these decisions will be partly taken out of human hands. We're in the situation just now, just reading a recent series of interviews with top US military commanders in which they said, well, the period of time from the president giving the go-ahead to a missile, a land-based missile being fired is 6 minutes. A submarine, it's 15 minutes. And because of the greater accuracy, you've got all the concern about, oh, the enemy's defense missiles will knock ours off so quickly that we better get in first. You know the classic kind of situation that you get in a crisis situation. So it is so dangerous. But also the development of a conventional conflict and the expansion of that is something we've got to be enormously concerned about as well. We see before us the failure of militarism. And yet, at the same time, if we're looking, say, just at the European situation, at the same time, the only language, the only concepts that the political class in Europe seems to be able to use is militarism. That we have this failed situation in Ukraine, but the only thing we do, must get more arms, we must send more military help. And rather than trying to develop new visions and new approaches. Because in the Ukraine situation, we have one in which, in a way, neither side can win. And anyone who has an honest assessment of the situation knows this. The Russians, the first time the tanks went over the border, in a way, the Russians had lost in terms of their aspirations, because their aspirations was to have a pliable government regime in Ukraine, which would not join NATO, would not establish any missile bases in Ukraine, and would pretty well follow the Russian line. That was, and what they've succeeded in doing is, of course, create a much more unified Ukraine, much more hostile to Russia, whatever happens.
One of the things about escalation is, if we'll continue with the Ukraine example, way back in 2022, General Mark Milley, the chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, so that's the 4-star general, I think he was 4-star general, who chairs the committee of the heads of all of the United States Armed Forces and advises the president. In it was autumn of 2022, he started to make comments about peace talks, and he was shut down. That's the chair of the Joint Chiefs, because he understood, irrespective, what Putin did was against international law, and it was also militarily inept. And I'm not defending what he did in any sort of way. But some have been saying at some point they'll have to sit down and talk, because at the moment you're seeing mission creep. We're seeing longer range missiles going into Ukraine. And they'll be used probably to blow up the Kerch Bridge or something like that. a bog standard military aspiration of the Ukrainians because of the Crimea and all the rest of it. I'm not getting into the right or wrongs. I'm not taking sides in this. But those same missiles could be targeted deeper into Russia. So the Russians will be thinking, okay, we could see them attacking the Kerch Bridge, but what if they use these longer range missiles to attack deeper into Russia? And then that ramps it up. The invasion of the Ukraine by the Russians was against international law. It was wrong. But additionally, it was an exercise in incompetence. The last time the Russians had launched an operation of such incompetence was in 1939 when they invaded Finland and made a right mess of that as well. But we're 2 or 3 years on. The Russians are on one side of it. They're dug in. The Ukrainians are on another. And the idea that total victory can be achieved against a nuclear superpower who have now got their act together militarily to some extent, not greatly, the idea that some sort of peace negotiation at some point, and I'm not a pacifist, but they'll have to sit down and talk at some point. And then you've also got some, not all, who are saying that if we don't win this war against Putin, then Putin will move into Poland, which is an absurdity of the Baltic states.
And there is quite a lot of that. It would be the Baltic states, or even Poland. And you get it from the Russian media, but then the Russian media is pretty well under the control of the regime there. So do you put that down as rhetoric in a way from both sides?
I can perfectly understand why the Baltic states are nervous. I perfectly understand that. After all, they were part of the Russian Empire at one point, and at one point up until 1914, folk forget that. And I'm not saying it's right, but Warsaw was a city in the Russian Empire under Tsar Nicholas II. But the Russians are not going to. The idea of them invading Europe or even those areas is simply not on the cards. The longer it continues, the more literal and metaphorical entrenchment takes place, the less likely that the Russians will sit down. I mean, they'll have to sit down at some point, we say, but when? Because as the clock ticks, then mistakes can be made. And there's a concept in military history called mission creep. We saw it in Vietnam, where the American involvement get bigger and bigger. You even saw it in Russia in 1812. Napoleon was going to stop at Smolensk, and then he went all the way to Moscow, and the rest is literally history.
One of the striking things in all of this, where are the peacemakers? Where are the statesmen? Yeah. All we have is the talk of war and threat. And now, we know there are big vested interests out there whose advantage this is the case. Because, my goodness, the companies, the industries that are doing so well, and the National has done an excellent job last week in bringing up the arms trade, but the profits are going up and up. Those shares are now much more valuable than they were, and they will be pushing as far as they can to keep up the war rhetoric. But we have a terrible dearth of statesmen with vision able to come and say, look, you're not going to solve this war through yet more deaths, yet more destruction, yet more violence. That there has got to be maybe a messy solution, a messy set of negotiations, but it has got to be a negotiated peace, because no one is going to get just what they want. And I think there might be a bit of relief on both sides if they were pressurized in to that position. But who's doing the pressurizing?
Do you think maybe even someone like Erdogan could do that job? I mean, maybe unlikely in a lot of ways. That's
a very good point, Marlon. And remember, Erdogan his armed forces, or his army, is probably the biggest in NATO, which is strange, but he's close to Putin. And you've got Hungary. So I don't agree with NATO, but the diplomatic possibilities of using Erdogan, I mean, I believe, and there's been enough academics who've come out and verified it, but there were talks in Turkey involving both sides
Yeah.
earlier on in the war. So that's important. But the point about Isobel was making about the drumbeats of war and the attitude and no statesman. The point about the military-industrial complex that President Eisenhower talked about in 1963 is very, very pertinent. Indeed, I would say it's even slightly different. People forget the American political system, and I was able to teach this as a modern studies teacher, so it's not radical. In the United States political system, you can buy airtime. In those days when I was teaching, it was to do with mainstream television. You're able to buy airtime, unlimited amounts of airtime. So even today, when political analysts go on to MSNBC and they talk about candidates, they don't just talk about the candidates' opinion poll ratings, they talk about how much they've managed to collect from the donors.
Yes.
Because that's as an important point as a political point rating. So the point about it is the military-industrial complex, what they're interested in is sustainable revenue streams, a bit like Big Pharma. In fact, I think the analogy between the military-industrial complex and Big Pharma, which people are more common knowledge with it, is actually quite good. The purpose of Big Pharma is not to make people more healthy. The purpose of Big Pharma is to sell more medicine, inverted commas. In other words, the unhealthier the population, the more profitable it is for them. And the idea of coming up with things that will make people more healthy and therefore no longer be customers for their products applies to the military-industrial complex. Indeed, this is a personal view, but I think even the military-industrial complex of individuals, they would say, oh, we don't want war, but the problem they have is their marketing tool is a rattling saber. I mean, if you think about it, they want to sell their products, they want to sell them sustainably, that is, all the time, so they rattle the sabers. And for the military-industrial complex, a war like in Afghanistan, that was a sweet spot for them. The West weren't threatened from a point of view of national security in terms of the Afghanistan war. The profits and the demands went on and on and on. We destabilized the Middle East. The destabilization remains. The solutions suggested are military. So the profits go on and on and on. They're turning to China and seeing China as a threat. Sell more naval ships, more aircraft, tie the Japanese into it. The profits go on and on and on. They don't want a war. They don't want to see China and the United States go to war, but they want to rattle the sabers so the United States Navy will build more ships.
Well, it's just Orwell, isn't it? It's just the concept of the three states and the permanent war, because that was how the economy flourished. So given that we're four little people on a podcast, what can we either do or ask somebody else to do? Are we doomed?
We're doomed.
There are only a few voices of sanity in Europe. We must congratulate the Irish and we must congratulate Austria, two small countries, and they have tried very hard to be peacemakers and to move away from the militaristic outlook and commitment. The hope is that one day Scotland can also be part of that. But it's also the case that there are quite a lot of states, notably Germany, who are suffering because of the Ukraine war, and many others are too, to some extent or other. So there are reasons there for encouraging some kind of negotiated approach of saying, no, look, we've had too much and this is not going to get us either side any further. So there is an interest, potential interest in that, but you've got to have people who will lead it off. And it's hard looking around to see anyone who will lead this, who will say something which may seem to be unorthodox, because look at the state of political leadership throughout Europe. So all we can do as campaigners to keep on trying to make the arguments, keep on trying to do the educational work. We're working in Scottish CND in the hope that we can in Scotland, because there's very little hope of being able to do this in England in the general election there, but in Scotland, at least to make the issues of nuclear weapons, of our 200 nuclear bombs there, of the biggest concentration of nuclear firepower in Europe here, 30 miles from Glasgow, to make these issues ones which will at least get into the general election campaign, that will get debated. And we do have more political support in Scotland if the parties taking a saner line on these things don't tear themselves apart. So there is that little bit of hope, and we will be going into this election campaign with the slogan of "Take the target off our back."
Oh, like that, yeah. And Deirdre Brock had been asking some good questions recently in Parliament about the Faslane and the leaks and the Category A incidents and the Category B incidents. So even on that level, even without actively being at war, just owning these things puts us at risk. And if that is not the best argument for independence now, I don't know what.
And there is an important Scottish angle to, and a Scottish perspective to all of this. Some time ago, there was a book launch, an international relations book launch, and I put the following question, slightly jocularly, but in all seriousness. At what point in the ferry from Larne to Cairnryan does the purser come on the tannoy and say, "Danger, danger, you're leaving a geopolitical sleepy hollow and entering a dangerous and uncertain world"? And there's too much of Scottish politicians in all parties talking about a dangerous and uncertain world. It is a dangerous and uncertain world, but some places are less dangerous and less uncertain than others. If Scotland shared a border with Russia or Israel, we'd be in a different kettle of fish. But we don't. We are in a relatively safe, geopolitically stable part of the world. And that allows Scottish politicians the space to talk about more peaceful solutions to things. I mean, I think that's really important, because the world is a dangerous place. But we talk about Scotland's resources. We talk about our people, we talk about our produce, we talk about big whiskey, although I won't say any more about that. But our literal place in the world is an asset. We are in a safer place than many other countries, and our literal position in the world geographically should be seen as an asset. The same is true to some extent of Britain. The reason the British Army is only 70,000 strong is because everybody knows in the establishment that no one's going to invade the UK. The reason they've got two big two big new aircraft carriers is so they can go wandering in other parts of the world, sticking their nose in where, because they know no one's going to, they know the Royal Navy is not going to fend off an invasion from Britain. I mean, there's a bizarreness to British politics, but we don't need to go into that. But we in Scotland are in a geopolitically very stable part of the world. There are issues, but, and in that sense, in that space, Scottish politicians and the Scottish political community should be seen as, taking forward more rational positions in terms of international relations.
Some of those Scottish politicians actually listen to that argument. I mean, maybe it's one that we should take up and make more of, the thing about where we actually are geographically, and that actually is safer, and therefore brings its own opportunities. But I mean, once again, it's just great to talk to both of you, and I was particularly struck, Isobel, when you were talking about just the lack of the peacemakers and lack of statesmanship. Let's hope that something on that moves soon, because well, the Ukrainians need it, but so do the people in the Middle East as well, especially Gaza.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.
So thanks to our guests, Isobel, Lindsay and Bill Ramsay there for, as always, a very interesting discussion, and we always learn a lot. We mentioned in the discussion that Deirdre Brock had raised a question in Parliament about worrying safety incidents at Faslane, so we'll just add this in here.
Deirdre Brock. Deputy Speaker, my written questions this week uncovered another worrying increase in nuclear safety events at nuclear weapon sites in 2023, with the first Category A safety breach in 15 years at Faslane and the highest number of Category B incidents since 2006. Category A incidents defined as those that had an actual or high potential for radioactive release to the environment in breach of safety limits. A former chief advisor to a prime minister described the existing nuclear stock as rotting and a dangerous disaster. Can he tell us how much of this extra spend will go towards ensuring existing nuclear sites, at the very least, don't deteriorate further, threatening the health and safety of armed forces, staff and surrounding populations?
Well, I'm pleased to report to the Honourable Lady that our defence, and particularly when it comes to our nuclear estate, standards are extremely high. Whenever an issue is found, it is properly and thoroughly investigated. Again, she's right to say that it's very important that we continue to invest in that. So, again, this money is good news. Obviously, every bit helps, and we want to make sure that it's being spent appropriately. As it so happens, we do appropriately fund the nuclear estate, but this will help to make sure that is put well beyond doubt.
Yeah, I can't say I'm very reassured by his answer there. And talking of what can we do, well, a group of citizens in Glasgow got together and shut down BAE Systems for a day. Here's a bit of footage from the Scotia media.
My name's David, and I'm here with a group of concerned Glasgow citizens alongside Workers for a Free Palestine to shut down business as usual for BAE Systems today.
I'm here today because I feel like it's really important that we have solidarity with workers and with lots of different sectors of people to show that we don't want to be complicit with the Palestinian genocide.
BAE produces weapons and weapons delivery systems and collaborates with Israeli defence companies, enabling Israel to kill, disable and traumatise Palestinian people. We're not here to shame or blame BAE workers. The management of BAE decides what to produce and who to sell to. It is to them we hold accountable for being part of the chain of killing.
And obviously here it's really hard today because we don't want to have to disrupt regular working people's lives, but we also can't be complicit in genocide.
BAE Systems provides 15% of the components in the F-35 stealth combat aircraft used by Israel to kill Palestinian people. BAE Systems are directly involved in the bombing of Gaza and the genocide in Gaza.
And we need to have this solidarity against the bosses and against the people who just want to profit off of the horrible things that are happening in Palestine. We can't let them keep profiting. It's not a legitimate way to earn a living. It's not a legitimate way for these bosses to be using people as parts of the war machine, and we just can't support it, and we have to do something about it.
Let's get campaigning. Thanks for listening, everybody. Bye now.